Hello and welcome to this Editors Roundtable, which is part of the Self-Publishing Advice Conference brought to you by the Alliance of Independent Authors. We at the Editors Roundtable today are all members of the Society for Editors and Proofreaders, or the SfEP for short. The SfEP is a professional organisation based in the UK but with members all around the world. We are the people who work with you to make your writing accurate, readable and engaging. Today we're going to cover a fair number of subjects around editing, including what editors do, the different levels of editing, how much an editor costs, how to find the right editor for you, how to plan and budget for editing, and much more. My name's Denise. I am a professional copy editor and proofreader based in Glasgow. I specialise in non-fiction, particularly business and education, and I'm an advanced professional member of the SfEP. I'm also its marketing and PR director, and I'll be chairing this roundtable today. It's over to everybody else to introduce themselves now, and we'll start with Kia.
Hi, I'm Kia Thomas. I'm an editor and I offer developmental line and copy editing across a variety of genres, but mainly specialising in contemporary romance and working largely with independent authors. And I'm an intermediate member of the SfEP.
Thanks, Kia. Carrie?
Hi everyone, I'm Carrie O'Grady. I'm usually practice under the name The Hackney Fiction Doctor. And like Kia, I edit fiction across all genres, developmental and copy editing, and I also review books for The Guardian.
Thanks. Catherine?
Hi everybody, I'm a former journalist who now specialises in fiction for mainly independent authors and small publishers. I work on a sentence level, I do copy editing and line editing mainly. I'm an advanced professional member of the SfEP and I am based in Aberdeenshire.
Thanks, Catherine. Finally, Louise.
Hello, I'm Louise Hornby. I'm a specialist fiction editor like the others, and I specialise in crime, thriller, mystery and suspense for independent authors. I'm based in Norfolk and I'm an advanced professional member of the SfEP.
Thanks. Okay, so the first section we're going to look at now is what does an editor do? Okay, and we're going to start with looking at the different levels of editing, and Louise is going to take the lead on that. Over to you, Louise.
Thanks, Denise. Yeah, so I like to break down editing, professional editing, into 4 stages. The first is shaping, and here I'm thinking of critiques and developmental structural editing. So this is looking at things like the overall story arc, the plot, characterization, the conflict between the characters, particularly the protagonist and antagonist, the point of view, and the pacing so that the tension's appropriate for the novel. And then the next stage is smoothing, and so here we're looking at line editing, and here we're thinking about whether the sentences flow so the reader is immersed in the text rather than tripping through it, and we're looking to eradicate things that would frustrate the reader, like repetition or overwriting, or dialogue that wouldn't be authentic for that particular character, and also at how we can play with things like sentence length and punctuation to build in tension or the opposite, and just overall just make the journey through the text at that sentence level a pleasant experience rather than a difficult one. And the next stage would be correcting, and so here we're looking at things like spelling, grammar, punctuation, particularly dialogue punctuation, but also consistency, particularly with characters' names. I think we've probably all had situations where we've had books with Catherine spelt in 3 different ways, and that's the kind of thing that a pedant reader can pick up on and leave bad reviews for. So we're looking to get those things right, and also do other things like other fact checking as necessary to make sure that everything hangs together, so that we're giving the reader the best experience rather than little red flags that they can focus on rather than the actual story itself. And then the final stage is the quality control stage, and this is proofreading. Now, back in the old days when we all worked for publishers and we worked on this old-fashioned stuff called paper. Proofreading meant looking at design page proofs. And so we were paying attention to any final errors, but we were also looking to make sure that the manuscripts followed typical layout conventions within publishing. But these days, with e-publishing, a lot of our proofreading is done in Word, and so the terminology is a little bit tangled now. But ultimately, it is that very, very final pre-publication check. And the only other thing I think I'd say about this at this stage is that the order of play is important. So if you start doing your copy editing before you're sure that the structure of your novel's right, that's a bit like baking a cake and then adding the eggs in after you've done your cooking. And it's just, I think it's really important to pay attention to the order that you do your editing in, whether you're self-editing or using a third party, because that means you'll get the very best out of your book.
Great, that's great, thanks. I think a lot of authors will be familiar with copy editing and proofreading, but maybe less so with developmental editing. But what I'm hearing is that that's actually an incredibly important stage for a self-publishing author to get their manuscript into a really good shape. Kia, developmental editing is something that you do a lot of. At what point does that fit into, how early would you want somebody to bring their manuscript to you for a developmental edit?
It really depends on how the author wants to work. There's sort of as many different entry points as there are clients, basically. You get people who want help outlining, you get people who've written the whole story and want feedback at that stage. I've had clients who've come with a half written manuscript who go, I know I need to fill things out and take things in a certain direction, but I just want to check that that's a good direction to take in. I'm not sure what I need to put more of in. And so, yeah, it really just does depend. And it's, oh, sorry.
Do you think it's better sooner rather than later, though? You think earlier?
Sooner, yeah, because otherwise you could spend time writing, carefully crafting beautiful sentences that take you into a plot hole.
Yeah.
And you can want to avoid that if you can.
Yeah.
But it really does depend on the way you want to work and sort of at what point you want to bring in another person, because it's hard. It's really terrifying bringing another set of eyes, critical eyes, onto this thing that you've put so much work into. And, we understand that as editors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Carrie, is that something that they can get input from a non-editor at this stage, do you think? Or do you think they need a professional at this point?
I think it really depends partly on the initial responses they get. I mean, every author, every independent author has to jump that first hurdle of like, right, I've produced something, I need to show it to someone. And hopefully, obviously first they show it to their loved ones who will tell them it's the best thing ever. Mm-hmm. And after perhaps they'll widen the net and, get some beta readers, strangers on Facebook. And that's the response they get from those people might be a little more harsh. And they may well then feel that it's time to turn to, someone who can really dive in there and maybe not just identify the problems, but also fix them, hopefully.
Yes, because it's one thing being able to identify that there are plot holes, but I would imagine that it is a skill to help somebody work around them and work through them.
Yeah, you've got to understand not just that this is a problem, you've got to be able to understand and explain why this is a problem and how you can get out of it. And I think the thing about a developmental editor, if you get one early on, that gives you more knowledge and more understanding of how to talk about your story and how to think about your story.
Mm-hmm.
That you can then use, in your next story and the next one and the next one, and you'll keep learning, and it helps you become a better storyteller.
Yeah. Kat, developmental editing isn't something that you offer, but if somebody was to come to you with a manuscript for copy editing or line editing and you felt it needed a developmental edit, how would you handle that?
I mean, it's difficult because you never like to go back to somebody and say, look, you've skipped a couple of steps here, it's not really ready for this. For some people, just sending it to an editor in the first place is a huge kind of milestone for them, and it's taken them a long time to get the confidence to do that. So you need to be aware of that when you're dealing with people. but you also need to think of it in the way that you are doing it to help them. It doesn't do them any favours if you take their several £100 and copy edit the manuscript when you know it's not ready, and when you know there's big problems with the story. You're much better served going back to them and saying, this isn't ready, but I can maybe refer you to somebody that can help you get it to that stage. As editors, I think we do have a duty of care in that sense, wherever possible, to not just take people's money because it's being offered, but to actually try and tease out what it is that they need, and either offer help them with that ourselves, or if that's not something we do, then pass them on to somebody that can help them with that.
So part of being a professional editor is recognising when something isn't ready for the stage that you offer, and putting it back into the to the author's hands with some guidance about where to go next. Similar with you, Louise, you do the same sort of thing?
Definitely. I work at the same level as Kat, and we've both had experiences where we've had authors come to us and say, actually, you know what, I'm done with this. And I think then it is acceptable, as long as the author absolutely understands that perhaps there was some macro level work that could have been done. Then I will do sentence level work for them, because sometimes it's a journey for them, and actually this isn't the novel they're going to publish. This is the one that they're going to put in the trunk and go, I did this amazing thing, I've learned a lot from it, but they're not ready to take what they consider to be backward steps. And I think as editors we have to respect that as well, that not all editors necessarily want to do things in the order we want to do them, and then maybe there are good reasons for that. So as long as all the parties know what the recommendations are and why the author is choosing to go along the path that they're choosing, then I still think there's a place for bypassing some of those early steps, despite how important they are, if that's the author's choice and if they're making an informed decision.
Yeah.
In my experience, though, most authors are really up for the challenge because they want to put the best book out that they possibly can. So it's horrible having to say your baby isn't ready, it's not quite there yet, and there's you thought you were near the finish line and you have a whole obstacle course left to go. But mostly they go, okay, let's get stuck in, let's exploit this potential that's there, and get out a really great book. And some of those are some of the most rewarding clients to work with, the ones who really roll their sleeves up and get into that challenge.
Yeah, so it's hard for an author not to take that personally, but if they can overcome that, then it can be a really rewarding stage in the editing process. One of the things that was mentioned there a couple of times is authors spending hundreds of pounds on editing, and that leads us in nicely to the $1 million question of how much does an editor cost?
Not $1 million.
Not $1 million. Only if you want it to be. And I think the thing that you'll notice throughout this round table is one of the things that editors say a lot is it depends, because there are so many variables involved in the editing process. The factors that we need to think about in deciding how much something costs are obviously the level of editing that's needed. So the different stages that Louise outlined will attract different fees. How long your text is it a short and snappy 40,000 word business book, or is it a 250,000 word sci-fi epic? The longer it is, the longer it's going to take somebody to read it. An editor still has to read every single word. Your schedule, where is your schedule? How flexible are you with timing? I think one of the things that all of us would say is don't wait until you've typed the end before looking for an editor, because especially if you have a specific deadline that you want to publish by for whatever reason, the editor that really is the best fit for you might not be available. And the other thing to think about is that the editor will want to see a sample of your work so that they can judge for themselves how much work it's going to take them to work through it. No editor will give you a price without having looked at your writing first. Does anybody want to comment on any of those topics about how they go through the process of working out how something is charged, the variables that they will take into consideration? Louise?
Yeah, the way I do it is I ask for a sample, ideally from the middle of the book, but sometimes authors just send me the whole manuscript.
Yeah.
And I won't read that for the purposes of giving them a quote, but I usually can read, if I read a couple of chapters, I can usually get under the skin of the book, and that helps me to make a decision, first of all, not even how long it's going to take me, but whether actually I'm the right fit for it, because sometimes I do get, sure we all do, I get a book and I think I can't, this isn't for me, I cannot get under the author's skin here, and that means I'm not going to be able to edit it emotionally and responsively. But assuming all goes well and I can get under the author's skin, then what I usually do is I do a line or copy edit, and I time it and I see how long it takes me, and then I do the maths.
Yeah.
I work out how long I think the whole thing it will take, and I factor in other things, like, because there are certain elements like how much tidying up the manuscript needs, in terms of, if it's going to need a lot of things done to remove just little itty bitty things like double spaces, and if actually it's very well written, but and the sentences really flow, but there are thousands upon thousands of tweaks that need to be made to punctuation, the way the dialogue's punctuated, then I know the fact of the matter is those things have to be done. They're not difficult for me, but they take time. And so I have to factor in the what kind of changes I'm going to be making, and how fiddly they are, and also if there's going to be more sort of structural sentence level stuff like recasts being suggested, and but doing the sample actually just helps me get a sense of how long it's going to take, and what the problems are, and because all of us are experienced in this roundtable, it's much easier, I think, than when you're starting out as an editor, to get a sense of to be reasonably confident about how long something's going to take you, and therefore how much you're going to need to charge. Yeah.
Kat, do you have a process? Do you have a fixed way of looking at how you charge for things? Do you quote per 1,000 words, or per page, or per word, or how do you tend to, or do you just give them a figure at the end?
Yeah, I mean, in my experience, most people just want to know how much it's going to cost, and they don't need to know, how much that's going to be broken down to. I usually give a figure by 1,000 words, because sometimes people aren't quite sure how many words their manuscript has, or if they're, they're still finishing it, they'll say, it's going to be between 80 to 90,000. So I can give them a figure and say it's going to be XX per 1,000 words, and that means that they can easily, work that out for themselves when they've got the finished manuscript. I kind of do things the same way as Louise, really, in terms of getting the sample, seeing how long it takes me to do. I keep records of how long pieces of work have taken me in the past, so I've got this kind of list of what my average speeds are for different types of work, so that really helps to inform how long it's going to take me. As Louise said as well, if you get something that requires almost every piece of dialogue being punctuated, that takes a long time to do, even if it's just fairly mechanical work. It's still something that takes time, and time is money.
Yeah, absolutely. Carrie, how far ahead would you advise an author to look for an editor? Good editors are busy people, right?
I think so, yeah. I would say at least 3 months.
Yeah. If somebody comes to you and says that they have a deadline of, I want to print this in 2 weeks' time, it's going to be difficult, isn't it, Kia?
Yes, I have had somebody come to me before and say, I want to publish in 2 weeks' time, and I said, well, good luck with that. And I understand, I have a client who publishes very frequently, very fast, and she writes right down to the wire. She's finishing it at midnight and sending it to me like the next morning. We understand that indie publishing is very fast paced. We have prolific publishers, but you do need to sort of plan and building some contingency as well, because, you know, all it takes is a couple of days of having a cold, and that sets your writing schedule back, which sets your editing schedule all off course. So yeah, plan and building contingency, because editors are busy and editing takes time, and you can't rush it. If we rush it, we do a bad job.
Yeah. Anybody ever discuss rush fees with clients? Yeah.
I have in my non-fiction work. I won't do it with fiction because of the way I work. This is just a very personal thing, but because of the way I work, I tend to be booked up quite far in advance anyway, which means rush work has to be done out of hours, and that means I'm likely to be tired. I don't think there's anything wrong with doing premium rates for authors who need fast turnaround. If you've got the time to do it and still do it well, that's great. It's just the way my life works. I don't. So I don't. But if I was going to offer rush rates, then I think given that it does require juggling and flexibility, that there is a case for saying this is going to cost more, because that, you know, it's what Kat said, time is money, and if you're going to have to put in your evenings as well, that's going to cut into, you know, editors have lives too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so we've been talking a bit about how we work out what we're going to charge, but we're still studiously avoiding numbers, and people do like numbers. So I am going to talk figures. I'm not going to put anybody in the spot here. For authors out there who are wondering if they've got no idea how much this might cost them, the Society for Editors and Proofreaders have suggested minimum rates. Now, this is not binding. You'll find editors who charge less, you'll find editors who charge a lot more, and of course all the factors that we've just discussed come into play about what the ultimate figure is that your editor will charge you. But the most recent figures that the SfEP have suggested are £24.30 per hour for proofreading, £28.30 per hour for copy editing, and £32.60 per hour for developmental editing. So I think in the UK, talking in the range £20 to £35 an hour, however that's presented to you, gives you a ballpark figure. Is that something that people here would generally agree with, roughly?
Yeah, I think it's difficult. It is difficult for authors, especially newer authors, to understand hourly rates, and I think that's why a lot of us don't quote hourly rates and quote by project or per 1,000 words or whatever. You know, those obviously are good standard rates. And so I think it's helpful as well to have a sort of idea about how long editing can take, which is obviously it's very, very difficult to pin down because every editor is different, and every manuscript is different. I usually advise authors to think around 2,000 words per hour as a rule of thumb for copy editing, just to work out a budget, but with the caveat that, you know, it depends. Sorry.
No, and I think this
really
I think that helps to show people how every quote is unique and every quote is custom to a client, that we can't just say we will charge X number of pounds or dollars for a 70,000 word book. And
that's why a lot of editors don't put rates on their sites, or if they do put rates on their websites, they put these quite large ranges, because it's almost impossible you end up delighting somebody or frustrating someone. It's rare that you're going to get it bang on, and
Absolutely.
So a lot of us don't put rates on, or, you know, for that reason. It's not being evasive, it's just...
No, absolutely. And I think it's important to remember that you get what you pay for. And I think we've all had clients who've come back to us after we've given them a quote and told us that somebody else has offered to do it for a very low figure, perhaps through a bidding site or something, but then that's not necessarily going to be the best job for them. So, you know, I think that the thing I like to remind authors is that you're not just paying for the time that it takes somebody to work through your book. You're paying for their experience and their knowledge and the value that they can bring into making your book the best it can be. And you don't get that for $50 to review a book. So it's a difficult topic, isn't it? But I think it's an important one for us to discuss. Louise, you were going to do a bit of a talk about planning a book budget. I think this follows on quite nicely from talking about money, timeline, scheduling, how to think about the process with regard to
We've actually covered some of it already,
yeah.
But I think that it was Kia that said, do your planning. And I always recommend that authors start building a book budget before they've even started writing, because this has been mentioned earlier as well, this issue of when you're searching for an editor, it's not necessarily about looking for the best, because there are lots of bests examples out there. It's about looking for best fit, and it's gutting for an editor, an author, I beg your pardon, if they find somebody who they really gel with, they think this editor really gets me, but I really want this book out in 2 months, and that editor's booked up 6 months in advance, and then they have to make that decision about waiting versus finding somebody else. And there are occasions where authors just decide, I feel, this was mentioned earlier as well, this issue of feeling that you're in safe hands, that it takes courage for a lot of authors to place their works of art, that these are things that are precious to them, and so it's so disappointing for them if they end up feeling that they can't work with the person they want to, and they actually can't wait. Perhaps they want to get that book out for some sort of seasonal event or something. So I would recommend you plan a book budget early on, and a schedule, so that you book your editorial services in, and give plenty of time for that. I had a situation just this week where an author is booked in for copy editing in a week's time, and he got a developmental edit and a copy edit done at the same time, and the editor has come back to him and pointed out lots and lots of things that he needs to look at, and he said to me, can I have an extra 2 weeks? And I'm like, no, because I'm now booked up until September, so and he doesn't want to wait that long. So now he's working like Billy-O to try and get everything done so that it's ready for me to proofread. And it's all turned into a little bit of a race, when actually, if he'd been a little bit more, he's a beginner writer, but if he'd known this, he'd have probably started planning a little bit earlier, and then he wouldn't have found himself so stressed. The other thing about planning is that it gives you time to save up, and we've just been talking about how much money this all costs. And the sooner you start building a book plan and a book budget, the sooner you can start sort of making all the thinking about, like, what do I need to find money for? Which levels of editing am I going to invest in? Do I need a formatter to help me with my Mobi or EPUB files? Who's going to design my book cover? All of those things might be things that you can get friends to do, or they might be things that you actually want to source a professional for. But if you're going to source a professional, they're going to cost money. So the sooner you can start booking those people in, sourcing those people, first of all, the right people, those best fit people, the people who can get under the skin of your work, and then get them locked in, and then you've got plenty of time to save up as well, and that just takes a whole load of stress out of it.
Yeah. Should an author expect to pay a deposit when they book an editor? Kat?
I tend to ask for a deposit for new clients. I don't usually for repeat clients. For new clients, I usually ask for a small deposit just to book a slot in my schedule if it's going to be a few weeks or months out. That's just so that protects myself a little bit, so that if I, have put them down for a slot and then, they're not ready, or they decide they don't want to get it done, then I don't have a sudden, hole in my schedule. I also find as well that taking a deposit kind of lights a fire under people a little bit, because when someone commits to it on that level and they've paid, £100 or whatever it is, that's a real incentive to actually get it finished, because you don't want to lose that money. For repeat clients, I'm a bit more flexible, and their schedules tend to shift a bit more as well. So I kind of, fit them in a bit more where I can. But I think, I'm not sure what others do, but I like to have the security of knowing that you know, there's a deposit, and that means somebody's serious about their swap, I suppose.
Yeah. Carrie, do you do the same thing?
I do the same, yeah. I sort of send over some paperwork, and there is an exchange. They do send over a deposit generally, especially for developmental editing, which is a more long-term project, so it's often more expensive, unfortunately. And you know, the thought as a freelancer, the thought of maybe doing like 6 weeks work and then having someone do a runner is kind of terrifying. So
yeah,
as well as for them.
I think it can help authors as well with their cash flow, you know, because I usually take 50% off from new clients. So to only have to find half of it at the beginning and half of it at the end, that can really help rather than handing over a huge chunk of money all at once.
Yeah. So the key thing here is to understand that it's going to cost money to get a professional involved, but to plan ahead and, you know, make it as easy on yourself in terms of budgeting as possible. So some people at this point might be asking, well, can I not just do the editing myself? Why would we not recommend that? Louise.
I'm a professional editor, and I blog every week, and I know what I'm doing with spelling, grammar and punctuation, and I can write reasonably well. And I make a mistake every time, at least once. 2,000 words on a blog, I always make at least one mistake. And that's why I hire mostly, I don't do it every time, but I mostly hire one of our colleagues to proofread my blog posts for me, because I want them to be as good as they can be. And so if I am comfortable with putting a sentence down and making sure that it's polished, and I make mistakes in 2,000 words, then imagine what I would do in an 80,000 word novel. And the fact is, we can't self-edit our own work. We just, there are probably a handful of people on the planet who can self-edit perfectly. It's not it's not a reflection on people's ability at all. It's just that when you're writing, you are in a different headspace, and you see on the page what you want to see so often, because it's in here and in here. Sorry, I'm pointing to my heart. So it's a show on the camera. It's the eyes can be tricky, and that's why fresh eyes on it, whoever's those are, makes a world of difference. Do self-editing by all means, but don't rely on it. Not if you want your book to be the best it can be. I don't.
And I know we all have people, authors who will come to us and say, oh, I've proofread myself. It's really clean. It doesn't need much work done to it. And then we find lots of errors in it. Kia, what sort of things do you think are quite common errors for people to miss themselves?
I think there's a whole sort of group of errors that it wouldn't occur to you to look for if you hadn't been trained to look for them. Things like hyphenation consistency. I mean, not many people think, oh, I said I put ice cream with a hyphen at the beginning and ice cream closed at the end. It didn't occur to me before I started professionally editing. And there are so many grammar rules that we think we know, that it turns out actually we've got a slightly garbled understanding of this, or there are situations where it doesn't apply. You know, we've all seen in editors forums literally hundreds and hundreds of comments about where should I put this comma in the sentence, because it's just not as simple, I think, as people think it is. And then there are the little ticks that you get into, you know, like, this is a killer line, this is a great line, and it's so good that I'm going to use it in 3 different places.
Yeah.
And things like, oh, I forgot that I took out the chapter where this character's brother first appeared because I needed to tighten up my pacing, and now this character's brother is in the end, but I know who his brother is because I wrote him. But the reader's going to be going, who is this person that just appeared? Yeah. So it's all of these things that editors are trained to spot and experienced in spotting, that, you know, not that you're not good at grammar, that you're not a good writer, but it's just so difficult to get used to the idea that these are the things you have to look for.
Yeah, and I think as editors, there's nothing more illuminating and scary than to have your own work edited, because I think, you know, obviously we have higher standards than most when it comes to grammar and punctuation, but we still make our own mistakes, don't we? So
my copy editor said to me last week, Louise, you obviously like the word wowzer because you've used it 4 times in these 1,500 words. And it's that example that Kia talked about of the tick. You know, it's just something that's, and that needs that fresh eyes.
Yeah, and it doesn't even need to be an unusual word. It can just be the style of phrasing that you have. It can get very repetitive, can't it? And
well, I write almost all of my sentences in the same sentence structure, and it didn't occur to me until I read a whole piece of my writing out, and I realised every single sentence had the same structure. And that's a really, really common thing that you don't really see in your own writing at all.
Yeah, I had one like that the other week as well. So we've talked about what an editor does, we've talked about how much it costs, and we've mentioned more than once the importance of getting the right editor and getting the right fit. So I thought we should have a bit of a chat now about how an author should go about finding the right editor for them, because obviously the right editor for one person is not the right editor for their best friend, no matter how highly recommended they might make it. So if we could just think about where people might be likely to look for an editor. And the first thing to say is that, and this is an important caveat, is that anybody can call themselves an editor. It's not a licensed profession. It's not an accredited profession, so anybody can decide to become an editor. So there are many pitfalls for the unwary author, because some people are very good at promoting themselves but maybe not as good at the actual work. So there is no one sure place that you can go to find an editor, but there are professional organisations who have their online directories. Now, we've already mentioned that we are all members of the SfEP, and that has its online directory where you can search, and you have a certain level of safety there because it's only the top 2 levels of membership who have been able to demonstrate their skills through training, through the number of hours they put in, through references, that they are able to do a good job and they are of a certain standard. Other organisations around the world would be things like the Editing Proofreading Alliance of Northern Ireland, Editors Canada, the Editorial Freelance Association in the States, the Institute of Professional Editors in Australia. Is there any others that people can think of off the top of their head where people
Sense in the Netherlands.
In the Netherlands, that's right.
And a SfEP in the Republic of Ireland.
Yeah, that's right.
There is a German one, and a Japanese one, but I can't remember their names.
Yeah, so it's a good starting point, I think we'd agree, is to find a professional organisation in your area and look at their directory of members if they have one. I think a common place that people will go to is if they Google online, they look for, find a proofreader. There are websites that will come up which are middlemen who connect editors and authors. Does anybody have, I know that some of you are on these websites. Kia, are you registered on some websites to put these together?
I don't think I am, actually.
No?
A lot of my clients come to me through word of mouth, either referred from other editors or referred from former clients.
Yeah.
I'm listed as the editor in a few of my clients' works, and quite a lot of clients have found me that way. So, if you have author friends who have editors they like working with, or if you read a book that you think is well edited, you can often try and find out who worked on that book.
Who worked on it, yeah.
And you've got a sample of their work there.
Yeah. Kat, do you work with some of these agencies at all?
When I started out, I was on pretty much every directory going. I've probably let my membership on a few of them lapse a little bit now that I don't need it so much, because I get a lot from repeat clients and word of mouth referrals and things. Ally actually have a directory, and it's a printed directory as well. I think that goes out every year. That's got details of editors and things in that too. So I've got some work through that in the past as well.
Yeah,
I'm on Readsy.
all right, yes,
Yeah, and there's been a lot of bad press about Readsy, but I really like Readsy because first of all, they don't just accept anybody. You do have to have worked on published works and have a degree of experience. The editors set their own rates, so there'll be vast differences, just as there would be if somebody went to the SfEP directory. And also you can search on Readsy via genre, which is quite helpful for fiction authors who want to work with somebody specifically in a particular genre. So that is, I probably get about, I think 30% of my leads, I would say, are probably from Readsy. Most of mine are either repeat clients or the biggest directory in the world, Google.
Yes. Yeah. I think it's important for people to know the difference between a directory where anybody can take out an entry without having any criteria met, and somewhere like the SfEP or Readsy where they do vet who they actually put on their books. Yeah. If somebody is not going through an organisation like a professional body or an agency or directory, there are some things that the authors can look for to help them make a decision, because if you Google, find an editor, you're just hit with like a million, 10 million hits or whatever. And I mean, I've written a blog about this in the past, and there were 6 things that I felt were helpful to consider when an author was looking for an editor. And I'll just run through them quickly. 1, have they got an online presence, and if so, where, and does it look professional? So that could be their website, their blog, LinkedIn. Are they on Twitter? Are they on Facebook? You can get a real sense of a person by their interaction on social media, and that's a good starting point for thinking whether or not you would like to work with somebody like that. What training have they done? They should if they've done professional training, that should be listed on their website somewhere. We know ourselves that having a degree in English is not necessarily what you need to be a good proofreader. You need industry-specific training, and that training might come from an organisation like the SfEP or the Publishing Training Centre or the Editorial Freelancers Association, but evidence of them having taken specific editorial courses. Are they members of a recognised organisation like the ones that we've discussed earlier, the SfEP, IPED and others? It's not compulsory, as we mentioned. Nobody has to join a professional organisation, but if somebody has taken the time and spent the money on joining one, then they're much more likely to be an editor that you want to work with. And I think it's important to say that not all editors are members, and you can have very good, highly experienced editors who are not members of any professional organisation, but it is one other factor to bear in mind. And then obviously, have they got a portfolio you can check out? Are they working in genres that you want to work with? Do they have testimonials from SASPI clients? And have they got evidence of CPD? So ongoing training, which I think is something that we all feel quite strongly about. Anybody want to add anything to that or pick up on any of those points here? Because that was quite a lot that I covered in terms of, using that information to help you make a decision about finding the right fit of an editor. What makes a good fit?
I think the one thing I might just quickly add is that do make sure that you do have a conversation with more than one.
Yeah.
Because it might be that you think you found the perfect website or the perfect price, but actually, do talk to 5-6 editors, because only then might you see the particular thing that's making you gel with one over the other. So by all means, I think you're absolutely right, Denise, to focus on those core criteria for helping you make your decisions. But but still have conversations with people.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Editors are so different. Like, we all have different styles, different personalities. We all work in different ways. You know, some people have a lighter touch than others. Some people go in a bit heavier. Some people are, you know, very like sort of rigid and descriptivist. Some people are far less so. You get people who are a bit irreverent and sweary, maybe. You get people who are much more professional at all times. And editing is, we're not just providing a service, this is a relationship. And everybody's going to get the most out of the process when you've looked around properly and really thought about it. And I think, although there's a list of things that you want to check for, and there are objective things that you want to find, your gut has to play a bit of a part as well. There could be, somebody could present you with a perfect sample edit, but if you just don't think this is the right person, then look for somebody else. There's no shame in that at all.
That could be something as simple as the way that they're communicating with you, either on the phone or via email. You might just not be comfortable with the register or the tone, or they might be overly formal and you don't like that. So there's, there are lots of different things, aren't there, Carrie, that are not necessarily tangible.
Absolutely, and I think it's keeping in mind with a lot of authors, maybe planning series, especially in genres like fantasy or romance. And, ideally, the relationship between the editor and the client is an ongoing one. And, I know, speaking personally, I have lots of repeat clients. I love getting their new work because I already know their world. I know them. I know what they want, and they know what I like and don't like. And so, we're just able to kind of build on our previous work all the time. And it's so rewarding, for everyone. And
that must make the editing, I would think, progressively smoother as the more that you work with somebody, the more books.
Yes, it's smoother, it's faster, it's cheaper as well, because I can kind of skip all the initial, like, tell me about your world stuff. And and it's more fun as well. I think it's more fun for everyone.
Yeah. I think one of the things that with a fiction editor in particular is finding somebody that's experienced in the genre that you write in. Would you agree with that, Louise?
Definitely. Working with a specialist fiction editor for a start makes complete sense, because it's what we do, it's what we love. And fiction has its own conventions and quirks that maybe perhaps people working in non-fiction like yourself might not be so used to handling regularly, just as you've got things in your field that we won't be. Things like, breaking rules for idiom and fragmented sentences that can have tension, or dealing with speech tags and punctuation and point of view problems. But within subgenres, there are conventions too. So I do a lot of work with crime fiction authors, and I see how a lot of them play with sentence length, for example, to build tension and pace, particularly in action sequences, or to instill a sense of fear and mood in the reader. And so if you read fiction in the genre that you edit in and you love that genre, then you come to know those quirks and understand them. And so you're in a much stronger position to particularly guide beginner authors who maybe are overwriting. You can use your knowledge of those genre conventions to help them, not just at macro level, but even at sentence level, to really bring the best possible book forward. Whereas in other genres, there may be very different conventions. I had an author a couple of years ago now she was a lovely writer, but she was writing historical crime, and her dialogue kept slipping into very contemporary slang, and it really jarred and really marred what was nearly an excellent book. And so understanding the conventions of historical or Victorian fiction even is, as I think, really essential. So I think that's why it's good to work with editors. All of us here, yes, we work across genres, but we all have our favourite genres and genres that we're more familiar with than others. And I do think that definitely has a part to play. I don't think it's a rule I don't think you have to have an editor who is who works in a particular genre, because I think there are other factors that we talked about earlier, like that sense of that register between you both, just that sense of familiarity and understanding. But I think it is one factor, and it's an important one.
Yeah, I think it's as an editor, it's about knowing your own limitations and what you're comfortable doing and what you're comfortable not doing as well.
I don't do space opera.
Do you not?
No.
Neither do I. Well, I'm the only non-fiction editor in this group today, and although I'm an avid fiction reader, I would not ever attempt to edit fiction. It's just not where my skills lie. I am much better with non-fiction and education and business and things like that. And it's knowing that actually makes it easier for me to say no to a client. If they're asking me to edit fiction, it's a very easy no from me. And I think sometimes it can be tempting, and it's not always a bad thing to stretch yourself into different areas. But I think, for me anyway, that is a hard limit. I will not go past that.
There's stretching yourself, and then there's doing something that actually is a disservice to the client.
Absolutely.
I worked in fantasy for the first time recently, which was a bit of a stretch for me, but I did a good job because, I'm familiar with fantasy, and I read some in preparation to make sure I still, had a good feel for it. But if somebody comes to me with crime, I'm going, no, go and see Cowle or Louise, because I don't think I've ever read a crime novel in my life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And sometimes it's an editor's background that will help inform their editing, because obviously, Kat, you've worked in journalism, you've worked with the police, so you...
I wonder what you were going to say there. I thought it was a history of crime.
A criminal.
But sometimes it's something that they've done before they were an editor. It's that specialist knowledge that can help inform their editing, even if it's not something that they've maybe worked on before. Yeah. Do you have a particular genre that you work with, Carrie?
Not really. I mean, like, I've got lines, like I won't do horror, which, I won't read it, won't edit it, don't even want to look at it, and but really you have to sort of take every project on its own merits, don't you? Sometimes you get something and you just know it's never going to work. So
yeah. I think it's all part of the process of discussion with an editor, or more than one editor, like you said, Louise, to find who actually gels with you ultimately. So you've found your perfect editor, you've scheduled them in, you've paid your deposit. What can an author do to prepare their manuscript in the best possible way for the editor that's going to make everything run really smoothly? Kia?
I think you try and get... we talked a bit about self-editing before, and there is a lot that authors can do to clean up their manuscript. Mm-hmm. And I think focusing on the basics, because, we know that there are rules that can be broken, but there are some that can't really, and they tend to be to do with, basic spelling. Run Microsoft Spell Checker. It's not very good, but it's better than nothing. It's going to catch mush two words together and things like that. And clean up, some of the basics of dialogue, punctuation, because those little things, I think Louise mentioned it earlier, they easily rack up into the dozens of thousands of changes, which is just going to make editing more difficult. And the more time you have to spend on little things like that, the more likely you are to miss something in a bigger sentence. If your brain starts going, oh, I know that this author has a problem with commas, so I'm looking for the next comma to check it's in the right place, I might miss a clunky phrase that's been used 4 times in one page, because your brain starts to fall into patterns of looking for things. So yeah, do as much self-editing as you can to clean up the basic problems.
Okay. And what not to do to your manuscript in terms of authors who are tempted to make it look like a book? Yes, Kat?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would probably just say keep it simple. There's a reason that layout comes at the, near the end of the process, and that's because when you're copy editing, so much stuff gets moved about and deleted that if you've spent hours making it look like a book and putting all your pictures in the perfect place, when you get it back, it's going to look nothing like how you sent it, because so much will have changed. Just keep it simple. Don't worry about fonts or putting in pictures or chapter images. If you know how to use word style function, then by all means use it, but if you don't, then don't worry about it. Just as clean a manuscript as possible with nothing fancy going on is probably what I think we all appreciate in our inboxes.
Carrie, what can a writer do before they send the manuscript to you to save money? So I suppose that some of these things we've touched on will save money because it's not going to be the editor that spends time doing that. Anything else that you would suggest?
Yeah, I think we have touched on most of the things, like getting feedback ahead of time, keeping it short is probably the best way. Don't 200,000 words, give us 100,000 words. And something that came up earlier was it sounds counterintuitive, but to save money, don't go for the lowest quote. Don't go for the person who will do it for 100 quid, because that is just going to end up being a false economy, like as not. Yeah.
Anything to add to that, Louise?
I would say, because I work at sentence level, I think my experience is very much like Kat. Keep your layout simple. We can put it into styles which make it consistent for you. If you could do that yourself, great, because it means that we will have to spend less time doing that. A lot of us I know that Kat and I have talked about this, we quite enjoy actually using the opportunity to run through a document and sort of take that sort of over a sort of like a broad overview, a pass of it, while we're getting a sense of what the different elements are. But just keep it simple. There are other things you can do if you want to for tidy ups. There are tools you can use online to help with that final polishing process. But in terms of even things like page numbers, they just don't need to be in there. And an editor is going to be focusing on the text and those core elements, the chapter title, a subtitle if there is one, the main body text, the initial paragraphs, section breaks. And if you start trying to be too fancy, it can become confusing for the editor, and that just means it takes them more time.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that we are offering in conjunction with this roundtable is we're doing a giveaway of the SfEP Guide to Creating a House Style. So for the first 25 people that email, and the link will be not here, but it will be on the website, they will get a free copy of the PDF version of that, which is worth £10. Creating a house style, it's something that I use quite commonly in non-fiction and in editing. Is that something that you find helpful in fiction for an author to have listed some of the conventions that they have in their writing and how they've used language? Does anybody like to see that from an author?
I do.
I don't see a lot, but I think, especially if you've got fantasy or any sort of made up orders of any kind where capitalization is, some things are capitalized where they might not be. If you can make a decision on that and communicate it to your editor, it means that they don't have to go, oh, I need to look and I need to check. If the decision's already been made by you, the author, then that can save us a lot of heartache going, oh, I don't know which way the author would prefer it. Better if we can make that consistent on the first round rather than having to go back and check. And just common things. There's a lot of things that aren't in dictionaries, and that there's different ways of styling, especially in fiction. So if you have a preference, then communicating that to your editor is going to save them, undoing all of your choices to their preferred choices. So that's a really good thing to bear in mind, that consistency is really a key part of especially copy editing.
Yeah.
And those world-building rules that Kia touched on, that can come into play with fantasy, science fiction, but even some kind of slightly futuristic thrillers, that there can be rules of the game which might not quite work in the real world. And if the editor understands early on what those are and how they are going to be rendered in terms of capitalization and spelling, then it's just another time saver.
Yeah. So enter our giveaway and learn how to create a house style, and it will make your next editor's job much easier, is the motto here, I think. Okay, so once somebody has handed over their baby to us and we have worked our magic on it, the big thing is, what can an author expect from an edited file? Kat, is it going to be perfect?
I'm afraid it is not going to be perfect.
Surely not.
Somebody, I can't remember who this was, somebody said once that, you know, a book with no mistakes is a book that's had too much money spent on it. Which I think is probably correct. You know, I was reading a book recently that was a kind of 10th anniversary reprint or something, and I spotted, you know, quite a few typos in it, and I thought, you know, this is a best-selling novel, it's been around for 10 years and there were still mistakes in it.
Mm-hmm.
I think authors just, you know, you need to have realistic expectations, and it's difficult because, you know, you want it to be perfect, everybody wants it to be perfect, but if you spend your life trying to chase that elusive perfection, then you'll never ever publish your book. You know, to try and put it into context a little bit, if I'm doing maybe a moderate copy edit on something, I can make an excess of 6,000 changes to a file. You know, that's a lot of things I've caught, but I'm not a machine, I'm a human being, and I'm not going to catch everything. There will be, you know, there'll be some typos probably, you know, maybe a couple of extra spaces. You know, there'll be little tiny things like that, and that's, you know, that's why you have the proofreading process, and that's, you know, that's a really important part of the process that shouldn't really be skipped. You know, if you're only getting one round of editing, you can only expect an editor to catch so much. People have said, you know, 95%, you know, is a kind of number that you should expect your editor to find the number of errors. I would hope to be a bit higher than that, but, you know, that gives you a kind of sense of what kind of numbers you're looking at here. And obviously, the more mistakes you have to start with, the more they're going to be remaining when the editor is finished. So if you can afford, you know, multiple rounds, get a proofreader. If you can't afford a proofreader, just get friends and family to look through it and try and find typos. You can make it, you know, a competition and give them a bottle of wine. The person that finds the most typos. So just be realistic. You know, editors aren't magicians. We're human beings, and, you know, I think all of us will promise to make your book a lot better than it was, but we shouldn't ever promise perfection.
Mm-hmm. Be suspicious of somebody promising perfection. Yeah.
And that everything that Kat said also applies within the publishing industry. Years ago, I worked on the bajillionth edition of James Herbert's The Rats. I was proofreading, so literally there would have only, when you thought, I don't know how many editions of that book have been printed now, but you'd think it would be perfect. You'd think it would have had too much money spent on it, but the main character's name was spelt wrong. You know, that's a major, big name author, big name publisher, comes to little old proofreader me, and it's just slipped through a million times. Yeah. So, you know, give yourself a break. Like Kat said, just get the book out there. Do your very best, but don't expect Gandalf.
Or Gandalf. I think that can be difficult for an author, because we all know, we've looked at published, we should never look at published versions of things that we've worked on, and you will always open it to the page where there's an error. Always. It's just the sod's law, isn't it? But people do get very hung up on that, and they forget all the errors that have already been corrected. And if, as Kat said, you've made 6,000 or 12,000 or 20,000, you know, corrections, even a perfection rate of 99% is still going to leave a good number of errors. And it's the law of diminishing returns. There's only so much money you want to spend on something before it becomes uneconomical. So it's aim for perfection, but be realistic about what you can achieve. Is it ready to publish once it's been edited? Does anything else need to be done to it? Will it be ready to go once you've had your hands on it?
Doubtful. You'll want to, I mean, I always tell authors to be realistic about timelines as well, because, you know, sometimes you'll find an author that's spent maybe 3 years writing this book that is a real labour of love, but then they expect, you know, to have it edited, you know, and out on sale on Amazon within, you know, 3 weeks. And that's not really, you know, a realistic kind of time frame. You know, when a file comes back from an editor, there'll be, you know, it'll take you some time to go through it. There'll be lots of changes. There'll probably be lots of comments that you'll have to respond to, queries on the content. And even when you're done, you know, responding to all of that, then you've then got the proofreading section. It's then got to go and be formatted. You've got all the stuff like cover design. You've got all your marketing and things to get ready. So, you know, it's a long process, and it helps to have that kind of mapped out, and just to be realistic that you're not going to get it back from the editor and publish it next week, because that won't do you any favours either. Take your time and do it properly, because you only get, you know, one chance to release this book for the first time.
Yeah. Carrie, what, an editor cannot guarantee a bestseller, can they?
Sadly, you know, much as we would love to, I'm afraid it just can't be done. There is a limit to our incredible powers, and you know, there are things we can't do. We can't guarantee you a bestseller. We can't even guarantee you that an agent will pick up your manuscript, or a publisher. But, you know, I think it's important to note that what we can promise is that people who look at your submission, agents, publishers, whoever, they will take it seriously. That's our goal anyway, is to get it in the kind of shape where, whether it's on Amazon or it's on an agent's desk or something, it will be, you know, taken seriously as a project that's worth people considering.
Great. Okay. I think we're reaching the end of this round table. So what I'm going to do is ask each of you for one little tip or piece of advice that you would give a self-publishing author. I will start, and my advice is to see editing as a collaborative process where you're working together with your editor. We are not teachers marking an essay. We want to work with you to make your book the best it can be. Kia, what's your words of wisdom?
I think my words of wisdom are, there is a lot of writing advice out there, and take it all with a pinch of salt. It's really easy to go too far in applying the rules that people tell you exist. But trust your instincts. We've talked a lot about how editors spot things and notice things, but actually I think most native English speakers particularly have a better grasp of the language than they think they do. So, you know, trust your instincts, and don't go through and take out every adverb from your piece of writing because Stephen King told you to. You know, use a bit of judgment.
Great, thanks. Carrie, what would you say?
I think I would say that one of the most important things you can do is just read. You know, find really good books, maybe books that are outside your comfort zone. You know, if you only write fantasy and you've only written fantasy for 15 years, why not, you know, pick up some of the past Booker winners and give them a go, and read and reread. If you've read a book, maybe read it again, and just ask yourself, you know, why has the author taken these decisions that they've taken? Why have they put this line here? You know, why have they started the book at this point rather than that point? And just, you know, read critically all the time. And it's just so rewarding in itself, but it's also rewarding in helping your own fiction improve.
Great, thanks. Kat?
Yeah, I think mine's probably a more kind of practical tip, which is to read your manuscript aloud if you can, or have the computer read it to you. You'll be amazed at things that your eyes just gloss over, particularly things like double words, you know, like the, and things like that you just do not notice, but they're very obvious when you're reading aloud. And it's also, you know, I'm quite a by ear kind of editor, so if I'm struggling with a sentence, and I think, oh, it's not quite right, sometimes when I read it aloud, I can kind of pinpoint exactly what's wrong with it, because I just think, well, that doesn't sound, you know, it just doesn't sound right. Yeah. So, you know, when you hear it being read back to you, or by reading it yourself out loud, you can kind of spot things that just aren't quite right.
Yeah, that's really useful. I think that's great. Yeah. Louise?
Mine's a practical tip as well, a self-editing tip. There's so much work for the indie author to do, and don't be afraid to use technical tools to help you. Earlier, Kia, I think, mentioned tools built within Word, but there are a whole raft of free macros and consistency checkers on the market, which are excellent, not because they do the job instead of you or us, but because they're like a second set of technological or electronic eyes. And there is nothing wrong with incorporating those into the self-editing process. It saves you time and it allows you to immerse yourself in the bit which you love the most, which is telling stories.
Great, that's brilliant. I think that's plenty of food for thought for our authors now. Well, that brings us to the end of this Editors Roundtable today. I'd like to thank you very much for joining us. I'd also like to thank the Alliance of Independent Authors for inviting us to take part in the Self-Publishing Advice Conference. I hope you found the discussion useful and illuminating, and I hope that it helps you to understand a bit more about the editing process and how it fits in with your writing and how it can help you to make your book the absolute best it can be. And I'd like to remind you that when looking for an editor, a great place to start would be the SfEP online directory. Thank you again for joining us, and it's just down to us to say goodbye now. Thanks again. Bye for now.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.